Rome did not begin with freedom. It began with fear. Before senators debated law, before citizens spoke of liberty, Rome was ruled by men whose power was absolute and whose authority was enforced through terror. Kings whose names were later softened, edited, or erased. Rulers remembered as founders, not for what they truly were. This video will change how you see Rome's origins. If you believe history hides its darkest truths behind myth and ceremony, stay with me. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear is the Rome most people were never taught. Rome's earliest rulers were not symbols, they were systems. The traditional story tells us Rome was ruled by 7 kings, wise men, strong leaders, necessary figures in a young city's growth. But this version is a reconstruction crafted centuries later by Romans who desperately wanted to believe their brutality had purpose. The reality was far darker. In early Rome, power was personal. Law did not restrain the king. The king was the law. His word determined life, exile, property, and death. There were no courts to appeal to, no written protections, only obedience or consequences. And those consequences were meant to be seen. Public punishment was not a failure of the system. It was its language. Executions were not hidden behind walls. They were staged. Fear was not collateral damage. It was the point. The earliest Romans learned quickly. Survival depended on submission, but this was only the beginning. The first kings ruled a city that was barely a city at all, a cluster of settlements stitched together by violence and necessity. Different tribes, different customs, different gods. Unity did not come naturally, so it was forced. Romulus, the city's legendary founder, did not rule by consensus. He ruled by dominance. The story of him killing his own brother was not meant as a warning. It was meant as instruction. Crossing boundaries would be punished with death. Blood could sanctify authority. This idea shaped every king that followed. Fear-based rule became tradition. The king was also Rome's chief priest, its top general, its ultimate judge. Religion was not separate from power. It reinforced it. Rituals reminded the people that the gods favored obedience. That rebellion offended both heaven and earth. And when fear alone wasn't enough, spectacle filled the gap. Punishment was designed to break not just bodies, but memory. A man executed publicly did not die alone. His death lived on in the minds of everyone watching. Women, especially, learned where they stood early. Rome's kings controlled family life with absolute authority. A father's power over his household mirrored the king's power over the city. Women were transferred, not married. Their value measured in alliances and heirs. Consent was irrelevant. Stability was everything. The abduction of the Sabine women was not an exception. It was a precedent. A message that Rome would take what it needed and later call it tradition. Women were absorbed into the city through force, then silenced by ritual. And the kings who allowed this were not condemned. They were honored. But beneath the myth, resentment grew. The second and third kings are often remembered as peaceful lawgivers. Yet peace was enforced, not chosen. Laws existed, but they did not limit the king. They disciplined the population. Order served power, not justice. Every regulation tightened control. Every custom reinforced hierarchy. By the time Rome reached the reign of its later kings, fear had become institutional. Tarquinius Priscus expanded the city, built monuments, and centralized power. He also weakened noble families, concentrating authority in the throne. Those who resisted disappeared quietly. His successor, Servius Tullius, is remembered as a reformer. But even his reforms divided citizens into rigid classes. Military obligation, tax burden, political voice, all assigned by birth and wealth. The illusion of participation masked a deeper truth. You belonged where the system placed you. And then came the tyrant Rome never forgot. Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. He did not pretend to rule by consent. He ruled through intimidation. He ignored the Senate. He used violence to silence rivals. He executed critics without trial. He forced labor from citizens to build monuments that glorified his reign. Rome was no longer just afraid. It was trapped. Tarquin's cruelty extended beyond politics. His family embodied unchecked power. When his son assaulted a noblewoman, Lucretia, the act exposed what Romans had long endured quietly. Power without restraint corrupts everything it touches. Lucretia's death ignited rebellion, but not because Rome suddenly discovered morality. It was because the balance of fear had shifted. The elite realized the king was no longer predictable, and unpredictability threatened their survival. So the kings were expelled. Rome declared itself free. But freedom did not erase the system, it rebranded it. The Republic inherited the architecture of terror. Authority remained absolute, just distributed. Consuls replaced kings. Laws multiplied. But fear remained embedded in punishment, military discipline, and family control. The kings were gone. Their methods endured. History, written by Rome's later elites, worked hard to sanitize the past. Kings became symbols. Tyranny became necessary growing pains. Violence became destiny. The suffering of ordinary people vanished from the narrative. This is what Rome chose to remember and what it chose to forget. The forgotten tyrants were not anomalies, they were prototypes. They taught Rome how to rule through fear while calling it order, how to normalize brutality through ritual, how to erase victims through myth. And these lessons did not disappear with the monarchy. They hardened. They returned in the legions, in the arenas, in the empire. Rome did not stumble into cruelty. It was trained there. The kings ruled through terror, not law. And Rome learned that terror works until it doesn't. Every empire that followed inherited this truth. Power enforced by fear can build cities. It can create obedience. It can last centuries. But it leaves scars that never fully heal. Rome's earliest rulers shaped more than a city. They shaped a mindset, one where violence was acceptable if it produced stability, where obedience mattered more than humanity. And once a society accepts that logic, it becomes very difficult to undo. The empire would fall centuries later, but its foundations were laid in these forgotten reigns, in blood, in silence, in fear. History often remembers Rome as a beacon of civilization. But before the light, there was darkness. Before the law, there was terror. And the shadows of those first tyrants still stretch across history, quiet, heavy, unforgotten.